All right, Alderman Arnett, you are now live.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Julian is going to give us a quick set of rules of the road, and then we'll get right into the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Welcome, everyone. You are all welcome to turn your cameras on. We ask that you keep yourself muted unless you're saying something, or rather, if you've been kind of acknowledged to say something. We'll be, I believe there will be questions throughout the entire event. If you have a question about a certain section, there's a little digital hand at the bottom of your screen. If you hit that, and then Marianne will keep an eye out for that. So when we get to a breaking point, she'll then go through and will acknowledge whoever rose their hand first, and then we'll go through everyone, and then we'll kind of continue that way. And then outside of that, I think have a great meeting.
Okay, so tonight I've asked for three very, very, very brief presentations. One on the police engagement and community, police enhancement and community engagement. One on the comp plan, and one on the maritime zoning legislation. I have a few updates, and if there's time and desire, by show of hands, we can get into city budget, which is ongoing, and there'll be time to give a presentation on that if people want it. But without further ado, let me turn this over to my good colleague, Alderman Savage, who wants to give you, or I would like to give you, an update on the peace initiative, which is quite timely because of the state legislature and the current legislature that's before the city council. So, Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Alderman Arnett, and appreciate you inviting me to speak tonight. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as I can. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. A few slides. So this ordinance is being introduced by myself, Alderman Arnett, Alderwoman Tierney, Alderman Gay, and Alderman Chandelmeyer. And what brought this about was all the national tragedies that we've seen in terms of people like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, who have been killed. And I think we realized after the Capitol shooting that we are not insulated from such national tragedies that we see happen. Things can happen here, and so we felt obligated to do what we can to make sure we can prevent any kind of incident from happening locally, but also to do what we can, as the title says, to kind of enhance the police, enhance some of their protections in terms of protecting some of the officers who require a duty to intervene, but also protect the officers, and also really trying to get some data and building up community policing. And so it's really a multifaceted approach. We spent probably 6 to 8 months putting this together, looked at some other jurisdictions to identify some best practices, primarily looked at Montgomery County, Washington, D.C., a little bit Baltimore City, and looked at NAACP, ACLU to get some ideas. And this is what we came up with. And I really appreciate all the co-sponsors' engagement with this. So to get right into it, since I know I don't want to take up too much time, we have data collection, publication, reporting. This legislation puts in a lot of new requirements for collecting certain metrics on no-knock warrants, officer demographics, gun violence, all kinds of things. And it also requires that this information get presented and reported to the council every 6 months, and also to the City Council's Public Safety Committee. So there are also a number of community policing improvements. And first of all, I think our chief has expressed in the past how he wants to go in the direction of community policing. And but I think it'd be helpful for everybody, the council, the police department, also the public, to have some kind of annual, or we may change that to be every few years. But the point is to get some kind of community policing strategic plan, so people really know what it means, how we're going to get there, and also hopefully include some of those metrics. And there are also a number of other guidelines for community policing in terms of trying to get the officers out in the community more and improving the training so they can do that. So the consent searches are also modified in this legislation. And I guess I should say one of the intents for this legislation is to kind of establish standards in our code, because I want to be completely upfront and say that our police department is doing a number of these things already, not all of them. And so, but we felt it was important enough to codify and really essentially etch in stone some of these minimum standards that we want to see our police department follow. And so they'd be obligated to include those in their general orders. And so one of these things for consent searches has to do with requiring that subjects are informed of their rights before consent searches are undertaken, and so that they can't obtain that approval through threats or coercion, and also allows for interpretive or requires interpretive services to be provided if there is some kind of language barrier there, because the department does have those services available. It institutes a number of new training requirements. So this would include educating them on the officers on practices that are already prohibited in the general orders, because I don't believe the officers may not be aware of everything that's in all of the general orders. But training on implicit bias, de-escalation, mental health, illness identification, de-escalation techniques for the crisis intervention officers, but also for the communication officers who answer the 911 calls, so they're aware of mental health services that are available to the residents, and also make sure that the officers are aware of mental health services available to them. It codifies some standards for domestic abuse procedures, and again, the police are following many of these in terms of requiring certain actions to be taken to protect victims, but we tried to increase the standard a bit, and in terms of requiring that they have more protection if there's really an imminent threat, or if the victim feels like their lives are threatened, that they have to take certain actions, and also require that, and this would be new, that if there's an officer who is accused of domestic violence, that their weapons would be confiscated during the investigation. Use of force, a number of changes to the use of force policies. And again, some of these are included currently, some of them are not. This would create a neck restraint ban. It would, and the no striking of restrained individuals. And as I mentioned earlier, a duty to intervene. And it would guarantee that the officers who do intervene can be free of any kind of retaliation. We have, let's see, prevents the use of military-grade weaponry, certain limits on crowd control. So essentially, no force would be able to be used on peaceful protesters. But if they do cross the line into being violent or property damage, then they'd have the authority to use such crowd control methods. And this would also, we're trying to figure out a way to see if we can apply this to any agency operating in Annapolis. All right, I think I only have a few slides left. So Human Relations Commission, this is an existing commission, but we would seek to empower them a little bit so that they can receive complaints of any kind of discriminatory policing practices and any kind of offensive social media posts by officers, and that they'd have to hold annual public forum for receiving community input on policing matters. And they actually may get more duties as we fully understand the state law and what the state law is going to allow us to do, because I think we can actually give them more power. So we'll have to speak about that. Some other random reforms we have in here are requiring that all uniformed officers have to be identifiable during First Amendment assemblies, so that there can be some accountability there. Prohibition on bias-based profiling and discriminatory practices, which again, I think is already in the general orders, and banning stopping and frisk searches for weapons based solely on discriminatory profiling that's not related to suspect description, And it would make sure that also that none of these standards are going to be subject to collective bargaining, because these are standards that I think the council, if we can agree on them, the council is going to want to make sure it can't get changed. So I think that's about it. So we're still reviewing, like I said, the state legislation. So there may be some changes coming down the road in terms of complying with that. And also, I think we may be able to go a little further in some instances. And also I have beyond peace written there, and that's just to mention that the administration is still working on a civilian review board. And originally we had that in this legislation, but we took it out because the administration has a strong a task force working on this. So, and also legislation down the pipeline might be something that would be looking at reimagining law enforcement and policing, something similar to what they've done in Montgomery County. So the next public hearing is going to be Monday, May 10th at 7 p.m. And I think this will be important for you to have your voice heard on this, because there are, we do have 5 co-sponsors, which is, good, but we have to make sure we go through the amendments to make sure this doesn't get too weakened through the process. So that's all I have for you.
So I'd like to thank Alderman Savage. You wouldn't know, except for me telling you, that he put in an incredible amount of effort and a lot of research across a lot of jurisdictions. All of us, council or not, are feeling a sensitivity to some of the horrible things that we're seeing happening. Fortunately, it's a very small percentage, but we really want to go on record as a city council that that's not what we want to see happen here. So if there are comments or questions, now is the time to show a hand. I think I see Karen Jennings has her hand up. Karen?
Oh, that was an accident if I did. I'm sorry. I was
Okay.
trying to look at what was in the chat window. Sorry about that.
Sorry. Well, if there are no comments or questions, we can move on to the next topic. Thank you again, Rob, and I hope all of our public hearings go this quietly.
That's right. Yeah, and thank you, Alderman. I need to sign off here shortly, but
Yes.
But thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you for making that presentation. The next presentation is from Eric Lashinsky on the current work going on with the city's comprehensive plan for 2021. Eric is going to give us an update. Again, there's been an incredible amount of work going here. We're only going to give you a cursory presentation, hopefully whet your appetite. Whatever Eric can squeeze in 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for your dialogue.
Thanks, Alderman. Appreciate being with you this evening. Really trying to use every chance I get to get in front of folks. This is going to be familiar to a lot of you who've been seeing past presentations. I'm just going to kind of go through a few of the housekeeping items in the comp plan and then get into something a little different. The schedule is looking like this right now, where this top line, goals, metrics, recommendations, that is something that we've been drafting, essentially preliminary draft versions of those. And we're looking to release something in late May that the public can review and comment on and let us know if we're headed in the right direction. We're going to continue sort of plugging that information into an actual plan document that looks like a book of some kind. And the goal would be to have something concrete for that in early fall that we could then release to more review from the public. So in between, lots of opportunities for additional meetings. We're doing one on environmental goals, recommendations next week, next Monday evening. So, just briefly to review, the comp plan is 9 elements. the list on the left, generally mandated from the state of Maryland. We added arts and culture that is not mandated. And our spin on that here in Annapolis is to come up with these three visions for the city: the thriving city, the functional city, the adaptive city. And we developed a suite of principles for each of those that are intended to be kind of the guiding principles that should be a foundation for our goals and metrics and recommendations. And, I should have said right away that this is a plan that's intended to take us to 2040. We'll do another update in 10 years. So that's the way it works with comprehensive planning. We want to put everything into this that we would want to achieve over the next 10 to 20 years. And then the structure of the comp plan breaks out like this, where we have goals, metrics, and recommendations for each of those elements, which are a dedicated chapter. Now, what I've been doing it's nearly impossible to summarize the comprehensive plan in just a few minutes. What I wanted to do is just try to cherry pick some of the things that, I personally, as a chief comprehensive planning in the city, would really want to prioritize over the next coming years. And really, these are the things that, I've been in this role for about 10 months. I'm a native of Annapolis. I moved back after about 25 years away. I'm seeing the city with new eyes. I'm catching up on everything. These are the things that have really jumped out at me as the things that are kind of, if not existential crises, they can make or break the livelihood of the city. And, so I'm picking out 5 aspirational visions that should all be very implementable and actionable if we do this the right way. And I just want to walk through each of these. They're all, eminently relevant to Ward 8, larger Eastport, the things that I just hear about nearly every day. So when we talk about equitable public water access, this is something that's going to be addressed in numerous sections of the comprehensive plan. It comes up in community facilities. It comes up in.
Oops, go back.
Excuse me?
Go back to the slide.
Oh, what are you seeing?
There. That's where.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, all of these 5 items I want to share right now, they're covered in multiple places in the comprehensive plan. I just wanted to share one goal for each and the kind of recommended actions that would go along and the kind of metric that go along. Just my hope is that, this might give you some comfort in the sort of level of attention we're putting into this comprehensive plan. It may not be your highest priority, but I hope it's relevant to you. And so this is one way of addressing equitable access. I think there's just a number of active projects happening right now that we want to continue pushing. I would say the only reason why Wells Cove isn't mentioned here is because I would hope that we have some resolution to that before this comprehensive plan is released. But that's certainly a priority as well. We're still calculating, we want to be exact in how much linear feet we have currently and what that would mean to double that by 2040. When you talk about affordable housing options, what I find myself talking about more often than not is the missing middle housing. This is the housing that would be affordable for somebody making 80 to 120% of median area median income. This could be somebody, a younger person out of college who wants to move to Annapolis, can't afford to live here. It could be a young family. It could be somebody who's moving out of public housing and is looking for another place to live, and there just isn't anywhere else to move to. So there was a time prior to the 1950s when Annapolis had a lot of duplexes and triplexes and what I would call light density, and those things are in short supply these days. And a lot of that type of housing would fit compatibly with what we have here today, and it would be very much in line with the kind of character we would want. So this is sort of how we would address that type of goal. And obviously there's a mention here of accessory dwelling units. It's a hot topic, obviously, in the city, and we don't have legislation currently, but I know there's some in the pipeline right now. Alternative mobility options. I do spend a lot of time talking about this as one of the primary tools that we have to address congestion and traffic concerns in the city. We are constrained geographically, and we need to provide better ways of getting around this city without a car. It's just simple as that if we're going to improve mobility for everybody, not just people who are comfortable walking or riding a bike. So there's so many things we could do on this. And I'm one thing that was not in the brochure for my job, but I'm happy to take it on is I'm kind of the bike ped planner for the city, and I've been extremely active on that front since I came on board. So there's too many things to mention in that regard, but I think one thing that's not here that's addressed elsewhere in the comp plan is we're focusing on updating our adequate public facilities ordinance, and that's going to be integrating alternative modes of transportation into those requirements. So I would hope that future development is going to be investing in that to a great degree. Context sensitive and predictable development. We have a number of zoning designations in the city that are not yielding the kind of development we might want, or they're providing not a lot of predictability. And we would like to narrow that gap between what a developer might propose and what a community might want to see. There's ways of doing that, and frankly, they rely on changing our zoning. And so we're going to be working with a consultant very soon at looking at ways of consolidating some of our zones and making them more predictable and based on form and performance, so that they can serve us better. And and performance here means environmentally, architecturally, fiscally in some cases, but there's been a sort of 40-year or so history of comprehensive plans trying to do something about our zoning, and generally it's revolved around having more mixed use, meaning putting retail and residential and other combinations of development closer that are sensible to be located close to each other together, in compact and connected ways, and we need to legislate that, and it's something that I hope we can make some advancements on in the near future. And then finally, this one obviously it could be a whole presentation talking about resilience, and we're taking a pretty broad approach to resilience that is not just looking at the risk of flooding, but it's certainly that is one of our primary concerns here in the city and here in Eastport. So I wanted to share this goal that comes from our sensitive areas chapter, addressing vulnerable shoreline areas. And so I would expect that, a flood resilience study for the Eastport Peninsula is a high priority. There are other areas of the city that I think will probably add to this, to our recommended actions here. We want to continue looking at those shorelines that could be more public, but also need to be restored. At Hawkins Cove, as you know, there's a bulkhead. It will probably become a living shoreline in the future, and help us manage sediment better in that area. Truxton Park is a huge issue for erosion and stabilization. And we have updated soil and erosion control guidelines in the city. We just need to make sure that we enforce them and have sufficient staff to do that. So that is a glimpse of the comp plan. Just finishing again with the schedule as a reminder of where we're headed. Happy to take questions. Sorry we couldn't talk about more, but I could obviously talk forever about this.
Yeah. Well, Eric, thank you. Congratulations. I can't believe you actually pulled it off. I thought that was quite good, and it does whet our appetite. First, I want to say the staff, even before Eric got here, has done an incredible amount of effort already on the comp plan. It's something that does affect the overall strategic planning for the city, so it's very important. One of my goals for the comp plan is that it be distilled into a short number of bullet points that can sit on every council member's desk, which are also shared by the Board of Appeals and the Planning Commission and many of the other boards and commissions, so that it'll be there when we're addressing legislation or addressing some form of adjudication. And so at this point, I don't know, rely on Mary Ann or Julian. Do we have some hands up for questions or comments? No, my goodness. We're going to finish this meeting on time. Jane, you're on mute.
So, Eric, that was so impressive. And I just would like to put in a plug that the comp plan recognize that it's almost like, especially in parts of Eastport that are very dense and very fragile, because some of the things that you've included in the comp plan, if you're surrounded on three sides by water, resilience is going to be an issue. Flooding, getting out, traffic, how do you get to the grocery store? And especially if you posit, which is true, that fragile surrounded on three waters is increasingly a destination for tourists, as opposed, yes, they may go to downtown, but they're going to come to Eastport, and we see them, they don't know how to do the narrow street thing. So I guess my question is, how does the comp plan adjudicate the desire for residents and business owners, restaurants, to have adequate facilities protected versus the interests of developers? And I'm real invested in public housing redevelopment, but that will be, a big stressor, if you want to say. I don't mean that in a negative way. It will be a stressor if HACA, really comes up with a big choice neighborhood. So how does the comp plan adjudicate those different interests?
Well, yeah, it's there's a lot of ways that, I think we're looking at how to calibrate the process, I guess you could call it, to ensure that community interests are part of the process. I would say, to speak to specifically to the Eastport Terrace Harbor House question, I mean, we're not, the way that the comp plan is addressing that is simply in supporting a community-based master planning process for the redevelopment of that area. We've been coordinating pretty intensely with HACA, our planning and zoning staff, and so we're not trying to second guess that yet. I mean, we're trying to lay the foundation for what that process should look like. And I will say, because it's based on as of now, we're pursuing a grant for a Choice Neighborhood Initiative master planning grant from HUD. That comes with a great amount of guideline for how that process should work and who needs to be involved in that process. And so it's not a developer driven process. It's like the opposite of it. So, it's just I don't know. It's a challenging question to answer, except to say that I think if the goal is to maintain, sort of the character that we have in our neighborhoods, we have to find the process to have a voice. That's not, it's maybe a little bit beyond the specter of the comp plan. It requires legislation too, but.
I'll give you an example where it is in the comp plan. If you look at Ground Zero in Eastport for structures that are already in place for ADUs, you could easily add 20, 30 ADUs in a made-up 5-block area. And unlike what some people seem to think, market forces are market forces. And if Eastport is, if the demand is, a single digit, or the supply is a single digit of demand, you're going to set yourself up potentially for people who want to buy those properties to finance them with renting out an ADU. And I think we're kind of, as a community, coming to understand that those ADUs will be at market rate for the area they're in. So the comp plan may be saying, oh yeah, let's have ADUs for affordable housing, but does it look at the facts on the ground per neighborhood?
Yeah, the comp plan, it's kind of a blunt tool when it comes to.
Yeah. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, it's ultimately it's the legislation, that comes from city council that's going to be, that could go, that there's quite a latitude for that legislation.
Yeah. I guess all I'd say is, when we know that there's a blunt tool that could have unintended consequences, perhaps the comp plan should address, just say, these are the unintended. All Eastport doesn't need is more economic stratification, because I can guarantee you some of those ADUs will go for $2,500, $3,000 a month. And we know that from real estate agents. That's not what we want.
So let me just jump in here and make a different kind of comment on the planning for public housing in Eastport Terrace and Harbor House, because the city, through legislation introduced by Alderman Gay and I, are early on entering into a partnership with the Housing Authority, Melissa Evans, Maddox Evans, to start planning now for the conversion there. And I have to say, in working with Miss Evans, she's very, very smart, but also very good to work with. So I think there's some reason for the community to have some confidence that we will get to a good place on that. Are there other questions before we move on to Maritime Task Force?
Alderman Arnett, real quick, it looks like I was notified that I think we might have missed a question from Cardi earlier.
Oh,
It
okay.
might involve Rob's presentation though.
Oh, all right. Well,
But-
Cardi, do you want to talk
No?
now?
Free to just making stuff up.
I didn't have a question, but I'm glad to be here and listening. So
Good. Well, we're glad you're here. And I think we're on to the next. By the way, all of these things we're talking about tonight are very topical. Comp plan is probably a little further down the road, but the Peace Initiative is in legislation. The Maritime Task Force is moving forward quite expeditiously. Some of the other updates I'll give you later on if we have time are also fairly timely. So Eileen Fogarty is part of
Look like Jane may have one more.
Yeah, Jane's hand looks like it's up again.
Jane, are you up for?
I just wanted to ask a quick dumb question. What is form-based zoning?
I guess the short answer is it's just a way of using the actual shape and look of the buildings as kind of a guide for what we're going to get. You know, instead of saying, oh, it should, it'll still be based on the kind of uses that should go in those buildings, but it has guidelines embedded in the code that say, that are more specific to the character of the architecture, or that it can. We have it already in our code. The historic district, the conservation districts downtown are essentially a form-based code. The neighborhood conservation district in Eastport is a form-based code. The MX district on Inner West Street is a form-based code. It helps us, gives us more predictable results in general. That's kind of one of the values of it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alderman Arnett, you're muted.
Yep. Other hands, or are we ready to move on to the Maritime Task Force? Let's move on to Eileen Fogarty and Mike Tomasini. They've been working very hard along with another large group of our friends and neighbors to bring forth the Maritime Task Force recommendations. So we're going to get a brief overview. Eileen, you're doing a big presentation next week sometime?
Monday at 7 p.m. at the Eastport Civic Association, and we'll have several of the task force members there. So this is to whet your appetite.
Good.
Great. And Julian, if you can pull up the slides, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I want to thank Alderman Arnett for having this meeting and giving us an opportunity to just touch on some of the high points of the task force. This has been an effort from Dr. Nash's office, Eric, who you just heard from, Lashinsky and Stephen Rice. The planning department has done an incredible job. And again, the goal tonight is, next slide, please. The goal tonight is to encourage you, A, ask your questions, B, send us all your ideas, and C, if you can, join us this coming Monday night with the Eastport Civic Association. So the purpose of this task force is fairly simple. It was 34 years ago. I was planning director. That's how long ago it was. And I was 36 when I was planning director. Anyhow, it was a while ago that in 1987, we brought the maritime strategy forward. And that was a lot of work from residents, some of the industry, and some of the property owners. And at that point in time, it was a very different industry. There's been evolution in the industry, and there is, since the maritime industry is really not just part of Annapolis's identity, but you think about it, whenever the state or the Visitors Bureau advertise the city or the state, what you see is the industry. So there's a real commitment on everyone's part to figure out what we need to do to make sure we keep this industry and that it prospers into the future. This effort will feed into the comprehensive plan. This effort will go to the City Council the end of May with a strategy. There'll be an ordinance after that, but all of the aspects we're going to touch on tonight will become part of the comp plan. So what's important as you listen to the various elements, the water access, the industry programs and funds, as well as the zoning, is to know this is cohesive. You cannot pull apart any piece of this and have it work. You've got to have the residents' expectations, the industry's needs, and some sustainable future for the property owners to bring it together, weave it together, and each piece is dependent upon the rest. And what's been really impressive is to see people, they've been working together for 5 months, really make compromises, but more importantly, see other people's perspectives. So they are bringing forward an approach that reflects everyone's interests. Next slide, please. Many of you are going to recognize this. This is your home. I just wanted to remind everyone that there are 4 different districts. There is one downtown. You have 2 in Eastport. The mixed Maritime, which is where Templeton's site is, Yacht Haven, the City Marina. And then you have Maritime Eastport, which is where Sarles and Petrini and now SAYC are. The Eastport Yacht Club is in that district, and then all of the Back Creek side of Eastport. And then you have the very large sites. They're really anywhere from 10 to 20 acres on Back Creek. That is WMI, Maritime Industrial. Next slide, please. The foundation of the districts in 1987, I want to share this with you because the task force spent several meetings and several discussions coming to the decision they wanted to keep that strategy. They wanted to keep these districts. They would make some minor adjustments, but they want to build on this foundation. And the foundation is pretty straightforward. And that is that the basis of the industry is its working yards, its working services. You can't have all of the other elements of the industry if you don't have a place when people are going up and down the Chesapeake on their way to whether it's north or south, that they can say, I can bring my boat in there and have it fully serviced. So the initial maritime districts and strategy, the residents, the industry decided they would bring in a very small subsidy. And when I say subsidy, allow a certain percentage of non-maritime only for sites that were really had critical uses to the rest of the industry. So it's a dozen or so sites throughout all the districts. And the idea was there was a fear, remember at that time, the site where the yacht club is today was being considered for a hotel. They didn't want these sites with boat yards and working facilities, on-land boat storage to go away. So the idea was to provide, if you had one of these important triggers, you would be allowed a small amount. At that point, it was 30% in the WMM, which is the Spa Creek district of non-maritime. Again, it's a simple concept. If you have a lawyer there, you can charge that lawyer, whatever, $30 a square foot. If you have a boat yard and boat maintenance, you may be charged $5 a square foot. So the idea was to provide an incentive for the owners to maintain their yards and their facility. What you'll hear tonight or Monday is that the only trigger that was added by this task force after much deliberation and people talked about, why don't we have slips as triggers? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? The only trigger added were fuel docks, because fuel docks are pretty critical to the industry. The other addition, after much discussion, was to allow 15% non-maritime in each of the districts. And what that would mean is that Back Creek would be allowed 15% under roof. The same for WME, and 15% would be added to what is currently allowed in WMM. What it comes out to, in all but one or two cases, it's about 2,800 to 3,300 square feet. It's a small incentive because much of what the yards have is not under roof. So it's basically one service. The one difference, or the one exception to that, is the Annapolis City Marina, because that is essentially a built office building, and their amount that they would get additionally is around 11,000 square feet. So next slide, please. In terms of the process kicked off in November with an ordinance that was introduced to create the task force by Alderman Arnett. We have roughly 37 participants, equally divided, residents, industry, tenants, and owners. And they have worked together for the past 5 months. They've had numerous meetings, many discussions. Many issues have come up where there was not agreement on, but many issues have come up where they have set a clear direction. And I'm going to share with you tonight the areas where there has been agreement. Through this process, they have reached out to the community, the civic associations, the industry, the planning commission, the city council. And what's important tonight is that we hope that you will share your ideas, whether you share it with me directly, with the planning director, Dr. Nash, or whether you share it tonight, or whether you want to share it with the Eastport Civic Association or Alderman Arnett. All are welcome. So with that said, I'm going to ask Mike Tomasini to tell you very briefly about the commitment and the interest of the residents and for water access. Mike, are you on the call?
I am. Thanks, Eileen.
Next slide.
Yeah, thank you. And next slide, you can go ahead and skip that one. It's just pictures. So when Eileen asked me back in October or November to come aboard this task force, I had never worked with her before. And I gotta say, I'm truly impressed with the energy and the competence that she approaches this work. It's very difficult to corral a group of people with sometimes divergent interests and let them have a discussion and try and crystallize it at the end. She's done a stellar job. And if she ever calls any of you and asks you to participate, don't expect to coast through some task force appointment because there are lots of tasks piled on. The one thing that I've been truly surprised about as a part of this process is just kind of how it's evolved. In the beginning, the way I perceived it was that it was going to be, the maritime industry has changed, which it has, and we have to try and find some kind of flexibility for the property owners, and just where is that gonna land? But as the meetings have gone on, and as people from different parts of the city and different backgrounds have gotten their feedback out there, the task has morphed into what can we do to support the maritime industry? How do we provide flexibility but make sure that the maritime industry still gets the support that it needs to continue to thrive, so that this kind of beating heart of the city, especially in these districts, continues to exist and is functional in the long term. So that's really happened. And as we've gone through it, a lot of it has been there are multiple stakeholders in this game. Obviously the property owners, obviously the maritime operators like myself and others. and also the residents. We didn't want the changes that take place as a result of this task force to negatively impact the community that surrounds these districts. So I think we've been really thoughtful. We've reached out to residents like myself and others to try and get feedback for some of the ideas that we're floating. And I think that a vast majority are really supportive of continuing on with the maritime districts as a zoning district, but also to help them to survive the next 30-year cycle. Things have changed in the last 30 years, but that doesn't mean that we can't maintain the maritime districts and keep them vital. So some of the things that we've talked about is that we kind of like not being walled off from the water here in Eastport, right? You like to be able to walk down to the end of a street and look to your right and left and get kind of a panoramic view. Whereas if you're in some of these other cities where they allow high-rise residential along the waterfront, you lose that. You don't get that. There's no continuity of your experience of the water, and it's worked here in Annapolis, and I think it'll continue to work with the the framework that we're building. We've also talked about maintaining a critical mass, which is the diverse uses that happen along the waterfront. It's the maritime industry is not just working on diesel engines and scraping barnacles off of boat bottoms to get them quick for sailboat racing. It's there are multi layers. There's businesses like mine on the pirate ship. There are small mobile detailing businesses. There's the big boat yards that do lots of high-end work on yachts large and small, and we wanted to try and keep that critical mass, all phases of the maritime industry kind of pumping. We've talked about incentivizing water access activities. How can we create an inventory of the water access opportunities in Annapolis and what they're good for, right? So where can you launch a paddlecraft? Where can you get in the water from a floating dock as opposed to from a beach? Where can you dip a fishing pole in the water? Where can you pick up the water taxi, and where will it take you? So my group is working on that. That's been part and parcel to our work. We've talked about, go ahead, next slide. We've talked a little bit about providing public access at privately owned sites, right? Like, so how does that work? We want to have a community boating center where potentially a resident could store their kayak or their paddleboard or their small dinghy and be able to access that without having to drag it down the street or throw it on the top of their car. Those are some of the things we talked about. We've talked about potentially enlarging the size of the restaurants that are allowable in the WMI, which is on the Edgewood Road side of Back Creek. So instead of just a kind of a 10-seat cafe at Jabin's or Port Annapolis, maybe something larger that could serve the marina customers as well as transients. We've talked about how the restaurants are not in their uses. They're there to support the maritime activities, to provide a place for employees in the yard and workers in the yard to come and get a bite to eat, or for marina customers to grab a bite to eat. They're not supposed to remove the access to that working atmosphere of a boat yard. Next slide, Eileen. Next slide. Yep. This has been a lot of the work that I've done as part of my subcommittee. So we've talked about how do we partner with the National Park Service to improve access to the water, right? We've got 3 layers here. We're talking about enhancing what we do have, identifying opportunities to add more, and to try and figure out where the various uses can be, right? What makes sense for who and where? Where do you have the parking to allow people to get access to the water on a business like mine? Where do you have the ability for somebody to pull up to the end of a street end park and launch their floating craft? Next slide. I think we've covered it all.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've covered it all. So I want to move on to questions.
I will. I've got. You've got the hierarchy. I think you've covered that. Let me just cover the industry, and then we'll move on. Next slide, please. So the maritime industry we've met with them several times, and they have worked within their working teams and the group as a whole. And their message is, we do not want to just reward slips. There's nothing wrong with slips, but they are not the key to the industry's future. The key remains these working yards and these working services. And if we're going to thrive in the future from the industry's perspective, and actually it was Patrick, I always say O'Shaughnessy, Patrick Shaughnessy, who came up with this idea. We need to have, we Annapolis have a really serious program, next slide please, to recruit, promote. Right now, we're having counties in the Eastern Shore recruit and steal our industry. We need to be out there recruiting. We need to be at the boat shows. Stephen Rice, the Economic Development Director for the city, has in the last month put together a site listing everything that's available in what location so that he and the city can help recruit businesses for these industries. So it's promotion, recruiting, but also incentives if you want to relocate someone. This is what other places do, incubator space, support for the workforce training for the trades industry. So all of this will cost money, and a maritime fund is being recommended. And there are several approaches for funding it, but it's really an idea that everybody is very excited about. Next slide, please. Slide after the next one, actually, next one. Mike touched on this, I think, fully, and that is that there's recommendation for moderate-sized restaurants in WMI. There was discussion on slightly increasing the size of restaurants in WME, but there was not agreement. Next slide, please. And the other area I mentioned earlier, that there's a recommendation with these significant triggers for 15% non-maritime. There's a recommendation for incentives for water access or community benefits, and they would be things like providing parking to residents and businesses, community boating facility, an enhanced street end park, and it would be a 5% incentive wherever these benefits would be provided. Next slide, please. We've talked, both of us have talked about a lot of the aspects of where there's agreement in terms of supporting the district, supporting the industry. Next slide, please. But I think the most important message to all of you is these people have come together and they've emerged with a direction that benefits everyone. This is not a benefit just to property owners, or with the water access just to the residents, or with the industry fund and program just for the industry. It's a benefit to not only keep these districts, but expand the concept so that people really have access to the water. And there is enough flexibility that as we move forward, this may not be a 30-year strategy, but it should definitely be a 10 to 15-year strategy. And we also, and the residents have brought this up, will have what we call measuring and monitoring. And that is a program where every year the planning department will go back to the council with an update on what's happening. Is it working? Where have we made progress? So with that, we'd love to take any of the questions you have and encourage you to hear the larger presentation on Monday.
So first of all, let me correct. I don't think the meeting is Monday, Eileen. I think it's May 20th. Is there am I wrong on that? Can someone from ECA chime in?
You're correct, Ross.
Okay, so we'll get that straightened out, but
I believe it's May 3rd was the date I was given.
okay, well, we'll need to get that
I'm told
sorted
that's a
out.
board meeting, not an ECA meeting.
Yeah, the ECA membership meeting is the 20th of May, I think.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get that figured out. But in the meantime, everybody's been given a wealth of information. I can assure you that there's a lot more behind the slides that we saw. So now is the time, if we have any questions for Eileen or Mike, to raise your hand. We are so good at answering your questions. I can't. You guys really want to be out of here by 8:30, don't you? All right. I'm sure there will be more questions, and certainly when we move from the report to the legislation, we'll be coming back to the community quite often. This is a balance of trying to maintain the protection for the maritime zones while also creating a work environment that protects the maritime businesses and all of the uses that we in the community kind of moved here for. So there'll be more to come on that. I'll give some very quick land use updates because people have sent me emails asking for this. And Eileen?
I'm
Mike?
waving goodbye.
Oh, goodbye. Thank you. And I know how much time you two put in. Evening meetings are part of your life, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. On land use matters, water access was one of Eric's slides, and we have some things there. Hawkins Cove is actually moving forward reasonably quickly. There's a plan developing. There's a placeholder in the capital improvement budget of $65,000 to start the initial planning for the rehab of that cove. It's on Spot Creek, just above Wells Cove. Wells Cove is going through a lot of work in our Office of Law and trying to figure out just how we develop and protect that water access. I will be putting a placeholder in the CIP for future development there. We have other water access issues. The Tucker Street boat ramp in Ward 2 was just on the council agenda at the last meeting. That is a launching ramp that is available for small craft in the city of Annapolis. Larger craft need to go to the Truxton Park exit. City Dock planning, which is a little bit further down the road, has some plans for water access and some of the things we're trying to work out to get back our own use of the city docks from the Wildlife and Fishery Grant. And we're still working with SAYC to talk about how we get water access through that development. I can assure you that the mayor and the council are all pretty united in our support for what's in the comprehensive plan and also in the city dock plan, which is to protect and enhance water access for the public. Couple of other land use updates. The Eastport Shopping Center is still in circuit court, but also under appeal to the Board of Appeals on adequate public facilities. You heard Eric talk about adequate public facilities. That's one of the hallmarks to make sure that the development we get also comes with the facilities that we need for that development. And then I was asked about an update for 424-428 4th Street. That has been in and out of planning and zoning. And right now, I think there's 2 different court actions that are being adjudicated. So they're not anywhere as close to breaking ground. We'll see what comes out of those court actions. I think they're likely to get remanded back to the city for further deliberations or delineations. And I think that takes us through land use updates. Are there questions? Gosh, we are so good. All right. I really want to try to end by 8:30. I noticed that after an hour and a half, people start departing. Let's see what our participation is now. Yeah, we're already starting to lose people. So let me just very quickly on the budget, which is going to be coming to a head on the 7th of June. That'll be when the council votes on the fiscal 22 budget. On the fiscal 21 budget, we were worried, that's the budget we're in currently, that we were going to be in a deficit situation for a number of reasons, much less healthcare use under the COVID situation, a lot of federal dollars for the CARES relief, and some restricted spending by the departments, particularly police and fire. We are in balance, and in fact might even have a surplus for fiscal 21, which is nice as we go into fiscal 22, where we initially were given indications that we might be facing a $9.5 million deficit with CARES and ARPA money, as well as planning on holding down spending. We look like we're going to be able to present a balanced budget. Finance Committee has been working on this with all the departments, and we will be reporting to the General Counsel our report on the 10th of May. Some quick numbers: the general fund revenue is $87.4 million. The general fund expenditures are $90.6 million. Similarly, across all funds, revenues are $147.3 million, and spending is $152.2 million. So the question comes up, how can we do that? This is not a balanced budget. And it's a question that I ask a lot over the years. There's several answers to this. We do engage in conservative budgeting, so we both underestimate our revenues and overestimate our spending. Usually revenues, particularly with a lot of unaccounted for grants, come in, and spending is usually lower. We do use some accounting, I'll call them gimmicks, where we are transferring money from fund balances to the budgets to bring the budget in balance. And because of the one-time only federal dollars, CARES and ARPA, we're effectively kicking the can down the road. But that will come home to roost. We're still spending at about a 3-to-1 ratio, salaries and benefits as compared to property tax growth. And eventually that is going to have to be balanced. The big driver of all of our spending is our salaries and benefits. The salaries and benefits in turn are largely driven by our union contract negotiations. 67% of all of our employees are covered by union agreements. Those agreements have been 4-year agreements, and they lock in a lot of spending. And some of that is some fairly significant cost of living adjustments. We also have fairly large step increases. And of course, we have the normal course of promotion. So the budgets are open for negotiation in 22 for the fiscal 23 year. And that is where we're going to have a very strong reconciliation of how much we can spend versus the revenue that we generate. I think I do have some updates on fees, sewer, water, and watershed restoration and solid waste. But I think in the interest of time, I will stop here and see if there's any questions on that whirlwind presentation on the budget. We are just, Marianne, are there any hands? No. Are there any general questions or comments or other issues that anyone in the meeting would like to bring up? Oh, I see Kathy Ebner's name here. We have before us accessory dwelling unit legislation. That is submitted. It'll be going to the Planning Commission next month for 2 different meetings, come back to the City Council for a public hearing, and then go to the Rules and City Government and possibly some other committees. That's going to be a controversial issue, just like it was the last time it came around. You should be looking forward to discussion on that. I think we could be adjourning early. We are good. If there are no new issues or questions.
Ross, I have a quick question for you. This is
Yes,
Jim.
Jim.
We're wondering if there's any news on the coach bus parking in Eastport, so that we don't have buses sitting and idling in front of people's houses. You have any news on that?
I do not. Let me tell you, the best thing to do, and you know this is how I handle it, Jim, is when you have a situation, first try writing me an email and I will respond to your email, but also copy the relevant city personnel. But really, I give everybody my cell phone number. And so the way to get to me immediately, if this is the situation and you want a quick response, like from SP Plus, call me. My cell phone number is 443-745-2901. If it's something that needs immediate attention, give me a call. Email is a slower way to go. If on these kinds of situations where the buses are there temporarily, we need to get people over while they're still there. So I've always been very free in publishing my my cell phone number for people. And so the 2 best ways to get to me are cell phone, text message, and then email. Email is the slowest of the 3 ways, but it is more effective in that when I respond to you, I also send it on to the responsible parties in the city. But the specific question to your answer is, other than getting enforcement people over in time to get after the buses that are running idly, there is not. And by the way, there is not in code right now legislation that prohibits vehicles from idling. So that might be an interesting piece of legislation, particularly if somebody wants to help me draft it, that we could get in the hopper.
Ross, Jane has her hand up.
Okay, Jane.
You're on mute.
Jim's question reminded me, I think the coach buses are more past 6th Street down to Horn Point or down to 4th Street. What I notice are the stretched limos that sit and idle, waiting, and some of them just turn off and sit there for a couple of hours waiting for the people that are bar hopping. But when they sit near Baker's, so if you envision coming out of Burnside and they're sitting right at the corner up towards the shopping center, and we did get the temporary crosswalk, and I think that is a life-saving thing. But my question is, remember, we can't get the permanent crosswalk because we don't have the traffic engineer who could do whatever has to be done. So, I've gone on record at the council, I'm willing to pay extra taxes but not if we can't afford a traffic engineer and we pay the taxes we do. So what's the hold? I know there was someone who was hired and then they didn't, but it seems like the city needs a traffic engineer.
We do need a traffic engineer. We actually recruited and made an offer to a traffic engineer. And at the last minute, that person decided to stay where they are. Then we hit COVID and we hit the freeze on hiring to balance the fiscal 21 budget. And there's going to be a very sharp hold back on spending in fiscal 22, and some of the balancing of the budget comes by just not filling appropriated positions. But again, that's something that if I get emails, I can
Well,
forward that.
Can I
and
make,
press.
can I ask is this a loony idea? In something like you have to do, I don't know how many hours it would take to do what they have to do on Chesapeake, but could the city contract with the county for job by job for someone who's accredited to the county to come in and do the work?
So they certainly could do that and probably should, although I'm not sure they want to make it known that that's an available resource, but there isn't a specific appropriation for that. It would have to come out of the rainy day fund. We have $420,000 that are set aside every year for special draws, and that's likely how that would be funded. But Jane, my understanding from the city manager is that there was a trial period and that they were going to go ahead and institute the permanent installation there. But I will, I'll check up on that. I'll follow up. But
Okay. Because the mayor promised us was that they would put in the one at Burnside, which the Bakers people were very supportive, because they're the ones who look out the window all day and see the near misses of people trying to cross. But then he wanted to march them up towards Americana. And we all know that the post office is another dangerous place. And of course, we know about the bank, people darting across in front of you at the bank. But that would be great if we could at least get one permanent one.
Yeah. So if you would do me a favor and send me an email, then that puts it on my tickler file. I want to respond to Jim and Frida. The buses, as long as they are legally parked, it is hard to regulate them. The thing that we could put into code, though, is that they can't sit there running their engine. But getting people who are legally parked to move along is not in the code. And I'm not sure how we would do it. I also understand, you realize the SP Plus thinks that their job is to do parking in downtown, and they only come over to any other place in the city, particularly Ward 8, if you or someone calls and they get sent over. Yeah, no, I agree. I see, yes, they are often parked over the curb, and if they're parked over the curb and we can get someone there, then we can give them a ticket. So that is a matter, as I said earlier, getting someone there on a timely fashion. And that is call me or text me is the surest way to get through to me, especially if I'm not in a meeting, which is fairly continuous. But texts get through if I can't answer the phone. And the real solution there is if we get people over in a timely fashion to give them a ticket, they're like everyone else. They'll follow that incentive and look for someplace else to park and idle. So it's hard to go after them with legal things, but if they're violating the code in any way, any of the traffic and parking, then we can get to them for that. But we can't, it's hard to make them not park if they're parking legally. So I see Heidi had her hand up, and then Mike Thomasini.
And then Mike, yeah.
Yeah.
Just briefly, without a traffic engineer, I think that my question is, can we get any kind of changes that we need to get done? Crosswalks and intersections, stop signs, for example. Some of the problems up at the shopping center are people can't turn left coming in on Americana and turning onto Chesapeake. That maybe some of the solutions might be to put stop signs there so people can turn left. There's so much progress that we can make in traffic flow. I'd like to see bike lanes, just simple bike lanes, go all the way down Chesapeake turn left at 6th Street and go into downtown. I mean, we've got wide streets. Parking is not that used during the day. We could do so many things here in Eastport. I feel like I want to get out there with a spray can and turn it into a renegade bike lane, and people would all use it. We talk about the comp plan and how we want to use alternative transportation. And there's so many ways we could just do it with minor changes. Is all of this held up because we don't have a traffic expert, and can we get one?
No, it's much more complicated than that. And you heard Eric say earlier, he's now our traffic planner. That used to be done by someone over in transportation. Now, a lot of these things, I've run into this over the years when we're trying to get Public Works to do things, are because they follow the state mandated standards. And their argument is, and particularly when we don't have a traffic engineer, their argument is if we do something different than the state, and as an attorney, you can help me with this, Heidi, we expose ourselves to liability. If we comport with the state rules, then we are not as liable for these kinds of things. And I see Alex's chat. Yes, the state stuff are for the highways, but they also, according to our Public Works people, I'm blanking on her name now but she's the one who has been filling in, an engineer. Why can't I'm trying to say Lily Openshaw, who used to do it, but it's not
Lisa
Lily.
Greco.
Lisa Greco, yes, thank you. Thank you. So they're taking a very conservative approach. Things like doing crosswalks and curbs, and I was talking to someone today that wanted traffic calming, like on Bay Ridge Avenue, all have to go into the CIP for capital spending and planning. It's a matter of getting them there and getting the priority. I think you're right if you're suspicioning that not having a traffic engineer, if an official traffic engineer, is a way to hold things off. I don't think you're wrong in that suspicion, but I get the same answer on that you do. So there's a lot of fairly inexpensive, simple things. We had that a number of years ago when they came in and they painted the hockey sticks to delineate the parking spaces, and they painted the curbs red. And we talked about doing other things like painting blue lines that bound the traffic lanes so that it tends to make people slow down with the narrower thing. There's a lot of those things that could be done, and I think could be done relatively simply. Some of the answers that I get, and I'm just being direct about it, is, well, if we do it for you, we're going to have to do it for everybody, and we don't have enough money to do it for everybody. So it really is a squeaky wheel. And this way you squeak the wheel with me is send me an email, and I will respond to you and bucket up the line. I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but it is the answer that I keep getting when I raise the issue as well.
It also helps to call the mayor's office and say, where's the commitment to pedestrian safety as well as other things.
Yep. I hate leaving Heidi with that unsatisfied look on her face. Can we follow up on this some more?
Sure.
Okay, I think Mike Tomasini had his hand up.
Thanks, Ross. My question is, I've been in several meetings kind of in unrelated topics where the issue of the buses idling on the peninsula is a big issue. And I think a lot of it is because, summertime's approaching, things are about to start getting busier, and the arrival of those buses is about to become more frequent. Is there not I know that Montgomery County has a law. Is there not an Anne Arundel County law or a state law that prohibits specifically idling, which instead of us calling SP Plus allows us to call the police? It's not a parking issue. It's a it's a state issue, and then our response is different, right?
So I don't think it is, I'm pretty sure it's not part of city code, because I talked with Kim Carantz about this a number of years ago, and I brought it to the Office of Law in the administration at the time. And I don't remember what the complication was, but it is a complication. I don't really know if it's a state law against idling. It should be, because it certainly is polluting the air. But I'd have to follow up on that to give you a more definitive answer.
I mean, I know there's a state law that prohibits me from operating my car unattended for more than 5 minutes, right? So the difference here, I guess, with the tour buses is that somebody's in it and they're running the air conditioning or, you know, whatever. But would it be easier to have the county council draft something that covers us, and then the call goes to APD instead of SP Plus?
Well, yeah, getting it to APD is better than SP Plus. They're fairly slow to react, and as I said before, they feel kind of territorial. They're about to go away with the new contract on the Hillman Garage anyway. So getting APD, but remember, we have on average 6 or 7 officers on a shift.
Right.
And that's part of the information that was presented to the city council Tuesday night, something that I don't think most people are aware of. So they'll get to us if they are available to do that, but they're not always going to be available to come over, and not available to come over in a timely fashion.
More available than SP Plus would be the argument, right?
Yeah, I think
it's
that's
not the
right.
kind of duty that SP Plus wants to do either way, right? Because unless they're going to be able to write a fine, they don't want to come down and just move somebody along and not get paid for it. Whereas APD might come down, just flash the lights, move along, that's not allowed, and clear again.
And your notion about the county, I mean, maybe that's something that Lisa Ravian and I can powwow on. We can do it jointly, like we're starting to do many other things between the city and the county. So I'll make a note on that.
All right, and I'll send you the link on Montgomery County's regulations.
Yeah,
so you can look at it.
that would be very helpful. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
All right, where are we? Gosh, we're only 4 minutes over. Are there any other questions, closing comments? If not, I think we can adjourn. We'll do another one of these fairly soon, but thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate your time. I hope your lack of questions was a sign of satisfaction with the presentations. That's how I'm going to construe it, unless you send me something to the contrary. Julian, thank you for taking care of us tonight. And again, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you, Ross.